Hello. For this presentation, I'll be discussing the 30 Years' War. This topic, personally, I heard about it in a European history class back in high school, and I was mainly intrigued by it because of how multifaceted it really was. Just the amount of layers and the phases that were brought about this war, uh, and the entire making of it, which we're about to talk about. I thought it'd be a good idea to revisit this topic for this class because it does deal real heavily with religion and politics and the interplay between the two. So, some themes to take note of before we get started are the violence in the name of religion, persecution of wrong or incorrect religions, which in the case of the Thirty Years' War was mainly just between Protestants and Catholics. This, along with the prejudice over nonconformity, whether you were in a predominantly Protestant territory or a predominantly Catholic territory, you were faced with a prejudice, if not outright violence, by those who were part of the majority. Um, and this was in part because of how you interpreted the Bible or or the sacred text, which was shared by these two groups. Um, in particular, there was a disagreement over whether Christians attained salvation in heaven through faith in God alone, or through a combination of faith and good work. There was a defense of sacred literature, or sacred or interpretation of sacred literature, which justified those initial acts of violence um, in the earlier phases of the war when it was just a purely religious conflict between uh, neighboring states or states that neighbored each other. And then there was the intersection of faith and politics, which is an idea that I will touch upon after I cover the history and the background of the 30 Years' War. So there was the history and background of the Thirty Years' War, the 1555 Peace of Augsburg, which can be seen as the roots of religious freedom uh, across Europe. In Bohemia, in particular, you had uh, Emperor Matthias, who granted his people the right to choose between Protestantism and Catholicism. Um, he wanted to make use of this peace of Augsburg by granting these people their freedom to choose what they wanted to believe in, freedom of conscience, as many people put it. But soon after, as he was succeeded by Ferdinand of Styria, he this freedom will be taken away as he believed that Bohemia should abide by the Catholic majority of the Holy Roman Empire, and that Bohemians should be or should identify as Catholic. Sorry, I had to take care of something. Real quickly, the people wanted to protest against the rescindment of their rights and their freedoms of uh, of the right to choose. So that led to the Second Defenestration of Prague, and then Ferdinand of Styria had begun the actual war, by uniting his Catholic forces against the Protestant rebel forces, which were primarily led by Frederick V. The Catholic side was mainly um, made up of imperial forces and as well as the Spanish forces, and the Protestant rebel forces were mainly Bohemia and the Palatinate. The Palatinate being a small group of territories that predominantly were Protestant. Johann Serclaes, who was of the empire, ran his own forces, known as the Catholic League, against Bohemian Protestant forces. In a successful operation um, that culminated in the Battle of the White Mountain, any remaining Protestant forces in the Palatinate were also defeated soon after. This general phase was known as the Bohemian phase, where there was massive Protestant losses and major wins for the Catholics. This lasted from 1618 through 1625. The Danish phase, 1625 through 1630, involved Christian IV of Denmark, who was worried of severe prosecution of Protestants. So he wanted to do was intervene in an attempt that he was not expecting to go wrong, but went wrong anyways. And this was due to his lack of support from neighboring fellow Protestant countries. So he ended up facing Syracuse alone with his own Danish army. What he was not expecting also was Syracuse to be backed by a new Catholic general known as Albrecht von Wallenstein. Um, with Syracuse and Wallenstein, he could not handle the pressure of two of more than one Catholic army, so he was, unfortunately for him, pushed back into Denmark. Christian the Fourth signed the Treaty of Lubeck, which allowed him to keep the territory that he had claim of uh, in the Holy Roman Empire, which is this red circle here, on the condition that he stopped intervening for Protestant forces. The Swedish phase, which lasted from 1630 to 1635, involved Gustav II, King of Sweden. He himself decided to intervene himself. He decided to intervene himself uh, in the empire to support his Protestant uh, comrades, I want to say. Um, he received aid from France, which was a predominantly Catholic country. The reason France did this was because they wanted to thwart Spain's influence and power and control in the Holy Roman Empire, and so they thought that by contributing to the Protestant efforts against the Catholics, they'd be successful in this, and they were. Saxony, Brandenburg, Prussia, and Sweden band their forces together uh, to win against Syracuse and his Catholic army in the Battle of Brighton Field in 1631 and the Battle of Rain in 1632. Wallenstein and Gustav and their armies face off in the Battle of Lutzen, which is one of the major battles of the Swedish phase, in 1634. Um, they both die, and it leaves the two sides severely weakened without their leaders to lead them. The French phase, 1635 through 1648, starts with the Battle of Nordlingen in 1634, um, where a new general, Infante Ferdinand, I forgot to include his name, uh, saw he led the his own Spanish Catholic forces and successfully regained control of the war for the empire. Uh, the Many people wanted the fighting to cease at this point because they were already tired of how long this small war had been stretched out for. So there was a piece of Prague that was introduced to the participating actors of the war, but this was declared unfair by France because they deemed it to be empowering towards Spain, and this is just their way to prevent and thwart Spain's claim to power. They want for themselves to be the overarching um, influencer. I want to say to in Europe, so they declared formally war on Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. King Louis XIII and his Cardinal Richelieu, financed Portugal and Catalonia, which bordered Spain, um, and their efforts against Spain. And this was seen as a strategic move because they wanted to further weaken Spain. And so, in order to do that, they caused rebellions in both Catalonia and Portugal, which had forced Spain to withdraw their troops from the Holy Roman Empire in order to withstand the pressures um, um, being acted on from their homeland. There were a lot of battles throughout this phase, but namely there was the Battle of Rocroi in 43, sorry, which ended Spain's image of military ascendancy in Europe. Uh, Real quick, the politics and religion of this conflict. There was the raw power within geopolitics and the sacred land. Many of the participating countries just wanted to stake their claim on actual tangible geographical land. Um, during the Thirty Years' War, Spain, for example, was seen as the predominant force that lay amongst Europe, which had and that had threatened France, obviously, which is why they called for war. But prior to the war starting, much of the dispute between Catholics and Protestants lay, sorry, lay in their claims to empire lands and territories, because the empire was partly divided by Catholics and Protestants. There was much dispute over what territories belonged to whom, and although the land in particular carried little to no religious significance um, to Catholics or Protestants, religion was used as a means to establish control and political power. Um, there was also the witch hunt during the war, which was it wasn't a small occurrence, but it happened nonetheless. Um, it took much of Europe by storm, as the psychological ramifications brought about by the war's length and the high death toll pointed the cause of the war toward women accused of practicing witchcraft. There was also the concept of realpolitik, which was not, by the way, a concept recognized formally during this time, but uh, it does apply here because the idea of religion, as a guise, um, is reinforced through the fact that France and Spain went head to head in the final phase of the war, in spite of them both being Catholic. Realpolitik, what that and mainly means is the idea that policy or any international conflict within a nation, as well as foreign policy, is decided upon primarily by circumstances and factors uh, that are factual rather than moral or ethical premises. So, what this basically means is that international actors are expected to act in accordance with rationality, with what is deemed factual by circumstance and not by anything ethical, such as what is decided by the Bible, for example, by the Ten Commandments. So, and this is exemplified in the later phases of the war, when France and Spain, which are both Catholic, go head to head over influence, over power. And then ultimately there was the massive shift in demographics, such as the death toll um, that would scatter and destroy the social order across Europe, leaving those institutions and bureaucracies in charge of the political process during and after the war shattered for extended periods of time. Lastly, there was the ramifications and consequences of the war. There was the Treaty of Westphalia, which settled ecclesiastical debates over uh, freedom of religion. Sorry. This officialized religious tolerance and freedom of conscience, regardless if one was Protestant, Catholic, and now Calvinist. And this, what it did basically was reinforce the provisions in the Peace of Augsburg, which, as I had mentioned in 1555, it laid the groundwork for the religious freedom or freedom of religion and freedom of conscience movement. This evened out power distribution across Europe. Every country had now, as a result of the treaty, was now promoted of the notion that Europe or European nations viewed each other as sovereign and as equal, and now that there was this balance of power between the nations. And then this laid the groundwork for future peace negotiations within the Congress like setting. They decided on this to further prevent the scaling of war, and they also established regulations for intervention by neighboring countries into internal conflicts that they had no prior business in, for example. And that's the end of my presentation. I hope you enjoyed hearing about the 30 Years' War. Thank you.